Please help me in welcoming to the stage Magee.
Thank you. I was 14 years old, staring at a pros and cons list that would decide whether I stayed in Hawaii or moved 5,000 miles away by myself to Pennsylvania to pursue a professional dance career. It had been my dream to be a professional dancer since I took my first class at 6 years old. And there were more reasons to stay, but there was one thought I couldn't ignore. What if I don't try? So I packed my things and took the scariest flight of my life. 3 years later, after brutal injuries and being thousands of miles away from my family, I was hired by a professional ballet company in North Carolina at 17 years old. And at that point, I thought I knew what my life was going to look like. But 5 years after that first big decision, I found myself in a similar situation. This time I was 19 years old on the phone with my artistic director, telling him I was leaving ballet. Around the time I was dancing professionally, my brother watched a documentary about coral bleaching, and he came to me with the idea to start a nonprofit to protect the ocean. Many times I told him he had what I called impossible optimism. We had already started 2 other businesses together, but his passion about going all in on a new dream gave me the same feeling I felt when I was 14, the feeling of what if. So again, I leaned into the risk, and for the second time in my life, I walked away from everything I knew. I moved home to Hawaii with no college degree, no professional network, no business plan, and no funding. My environmental career was off to a pretty bleak start. All I knew was I had just traded 13 years of dance training and my childhood dream for this idea of starting an environmental organization, and I had no idea what part of the environment it would even focus on. Born and raised in Hawaii, I fell in love with the ocean. It was the only thing that made me feel alive the way dancing did. As an athlete, I knew there was a time limit on my career, but I always imagined that eventually I would work in conservation, maybe in my 30s or 40s, which for a teenager feels like a made-up stage in life. In 2022, when I started Global Preservation Initiative, I relied on something dance had taught me: resourcefulness. In life, there are resources: money, time, education, connections, technology. And then there's resourcefulness: creativity, curiosity, determination, and passion. And as Tony Robbins says, the ultimate resource is resourcefulness. A degree in dance might make you more knowledgeable, but it doesn't make you a great dancer. And chasing that dream taught me something important. Hard work and luck can be enough, and the harder you work, the luckier you get. Which is how I ended up giving my first environmental presentation to a class of 2- and 3-year-olds. Turns out they're not exactly the target audience for conversations on plastic pollution, industrial fishing, and proactive environmental solutions. And I didn't gain much confidence after that event, but I did gain reassurance that my do-it-yourself education of binging documentaries, reading articles, and scouring nonprofit websites could be enough. During that time, I also realized something that completely changed the way I saw the ocean. The ocean is Earth's life support system. It makes 50 to 70% of the world's oxygen. It holds 97% of Earth's water. As the largest carbon sink, it helps keep Earth at the temperature where life can exist. And right now, the pieces that keep it working are being threatened by plastic pollution and under-regulated industrial fishing. I also realized something else. These are not just environmental issues. They're human issues, and they're symptoms of our growing disconnect from nature. And preserving both human and environmental health begins with restoring that connection. The other thing I learned is that there are already a lot of organizations doing this work, and it might have been a good idea for me to look into that before starting my own business. But I started with what felt obvious to me, picking up trash. At first, it was just me, sometimes a few friends, while my brother documented from behind the camera. Over time, more people began showing up, more schools invited me to speak. And as we removed thousands of pounds of debris, it became clear cleanups weren't enough. Trash was just the symptom. To really protect these places, we needed to address the root issue. We had to strengthen people's connection with nature so they saw it as worth protecting. And not just by telling them about it, but by giving them the experience of caring for it. So the work evolved. Cleanups expanded into restoration. Through partnerships with government agencies, I began adopting beach parks and hosting recurring work days for community members to restore these places by removing litter, clearing invasive plants, and planting native species. It was no longer just about the trash or the scary facts. It was about getting people outside and helping them connect with nature by giving back to it. More and more, when I visit these beach parks, people come up to me and tell me they've noticed the transformation and want to join our next work days. At the same time, our education programs were evolving to make learning about nature engaging and simple enough that these complex issues feel approachable. Some more of our restoration work. Students gain understanding in the classroom and then apply what they learned at our restoration sites. And as restoration and education began changing mindsets, it became clear they were still only part of the solution. We also needed system change. I began advocating for policies that protect both human and environmental health, and partnering with businesses that provide alternatives to common plastic items, helping shift consumer behavior. One of GPI's longest education partnerships actually started through dance. One of my dance teachers from my home studio in Hawaii saw a video I posted online about the work I was doing with students, and she invited me to speak in her classroom. And then she invited me back the next quarter, and again, and again. And for the past 3 years, every 6th grade student at her school has received our Oceans curriculum. Then in 7th grade, they learn our Nature Cycles curriculum, and we bring them on a field trip to one of our restoration sites that is right down the road from their school. What did I just do? These students, these hundreds of students I've worked with, have removed over 2,000 pounds of trash from this park and helped care for the hundreds of native plants we put in at this site. And I have to admit, walking around their school, everyone knows me, and it's super cool being known as the Oceans Guy. But what excites me most is creating education experiences that combine different learning styles and make conservation something students actually enjoy being a part of. We also track outcomes, measuring information retention and behavior change to see the long-term impacts that these sessions create. And this is just one of many school partnerships. In 2025, my brother passed away at 24 years old. He was the spark that started this organization. I was the one that ran with it. Losing him brought me back to why we started this in the first place, to protect the coral reefs we grew up snorkeling and the places that defined our childhood. My mom is a doctor. My dad is a captain on scuba and whale watching boats, and it feels fitting that GPI's mission became preserving shared human and environmental health. Over the past 4 years, that mission has impacted over 4,500 students and 3,600 volunteers. Results made possible through partnerships with over 100 schools, businesses, and community organizations. And along the way, I also learned something else about conservation work. There's no shortage of passion, but there's often a shortage of tangible results. And in the nonprofit world, when you rely on donations, trust becomes your most valuable asset. So I decided to lead with radical transparency, making all of our program impact and financial data simple and accessible to anyone online. At first, I did this just so I understood the impact I was making. Eventually, it became part of the mission. Not just improving the environment, but improving the way philanthropy is approached. People often ask me if Global Preservation Initiative is really a global organization. Originally, the name reflected something my brother and I realized. Despite being one of the most isolated places on the planet, my home in Hawaii is still deeply impacted by the global pressures of plastic pollution and underregulated fishing. The trash washing up on our beaches in Hawaii doesn't come from Hawaii. Most of it has traveled thousands of miles across the ocean, and a majority of it is commercial fishing gear. Over time, the sun breaks that plastic down into smaller pieces that pollute our food, water, and air. These are not Hawaii's issues. They're Earth's issues. And the environmental movement is not just for environmentalists. Over time, I've had the opportunity to share that perspective with students, partners, and volunteers across 37 cities and 6 countries. One thing I've learned from speaking to thousands of students is that in every group, there's a pattern. Most people are listening, some never really start, but in every room, there's always at least one student who really connects with the information. I remember times when I was that student, like in 6th grade when I went to a farm field trip and learned about composting, or in my 12th grade environmental science class. 2 years ago, I spoke to a classroom in New Hampshire, and one of those students remembered me, and that's who invited me to speak here today. It makes me think about the people who made the Coral documentary my brother watched, and how they'll probably never know the impact it had on our lives, or the thousands of people who have been impacted because he watched it. You never really know which moment will matter to someone. Looking back, the biggest decisions in my life didn't make sense on paper. The pros and cons list actually said I shouldn't do them, but my life has been defined by moments where I took risks to pursue passion and trusted resourcefulness to carry me until the resources appeared. The beautiful thing about humans is that we often do more for others than we do for ourselves. And when we give to something bigger than ourselves, especially something we care deeply about, we feel that we've made a difference. When you pick up trash that might save an animal, or plant a tree that'll give shade to someone you'll never meet, begin to see how connected everything is. When I think about the idea of paving your own path, my invitation to you is to take risks to find what makes you feel most alive. And when you find it, take even more risks to pursue it. Because when something calls you to do more, be more, give more, and risk more, despite what the pros and cons list might say, that's where we find what we're uniquely meant to contribute. And that's when we realize that resourcefulness is the ultimate resource. Thank you.